Yo, what's up? Today I will show you everything you need to know about recoil in Enlisted, especially how to control it and how to make sure that the recoil of even the strongest and hardest to control weapons becomes easy for you, so you can use all of those strongest weapons in the game in a much more precise way and get many more kills. Depending on the type of weapon you are using, recoil will affect you differently, so that's why we will go over all types of weapons, see how recoil affects them and how to mitigate this recoil. And in the end I will also show you some perks quickly, which will make sure that you have even less recoil, because sometimes it's not as straightforward as just putting on the maximum recoil reduction perks or whatever. There are some additional tricks you want to know to make sure that you have maximum precision. So first we start with bolt action rifles, and we go into practice mode, and I also recommend to use practice mode especially for planes, because that's the best way to learn how to fly. There's simply not enough time to learn flying just by playing normal games. And it's also good for shooting weapons. It's also good for testing out premium squads before you buy them. And it's especially good to get a nice feeling for the weapons you're using. So first we're gonna use the bolt action, and we see how does it affect us. So we stand here. Now there are two modes of aiming. Keep in mind, this is not an aiming guide, it's a recoil guide. I will also release an aiming guide later, in the next weeks. And understanding recoil will make your aiming much better. Also, I had to wait to make these guides because there were obviously these recoil changes coming. And also around 1 week of bugs. So this problem seems to be solved, so now I can release you the data that Enlisted is going to have for the next years. First of all, how do you zoom? The harder you zoom in, the bigger the optical recoil. Optical recoil is that if you zoom in like this, you don't see much weapon swaying, but if you zoom in like this, you see much more weapon swaying. Not necessarily with a bolt action, but with full auto weapons. So the closer you zoom in, the bigger your weapon seems to shake, the harder it becomes to aim. Keep in mind, you're still landing all your shots, because for the weapon and the barrel itself, it doesn't matter if you aim like this or like this, but on your screen the weapon shaking looks more extreme. So this is important to know. Now obviously bolt actions don't have much of a recoil, especially since they're resetting their position after every shot. They don't reset them perfectly, but quite almost. Yeah, so this is not a problem. These are very easy to control. Now what about semi-auto weapons? Well, if you're shooting them, you see the weapon is going up. And this is where recoil patterns come in. Every single weapon has a roughly distinct pattern. Most patterns are something of a straight line upwards, and this is the basic pattern. And some weapons go a little bit to the left, but most go a little bit to the right. And the faster a weapon rises, the higher the vertical recoil is. And if the stronger it sways to the sides, the more additional recoil effect you have. So as you found out, this FG42 goes up to the slightly right, and let's see how fast it rises. Yeah, this is quite slow. Now, and here's exactly what you want to do. If you shoot a weapon like this, once you figure out the recoil that's going like this, all you need to do is, after every shot, to aim your mouse in the opposite direction. So you go in the center and then aim in the opposite direction, and we see. Yep, I was controlling the recoil almost perfectly, except for the last two shots where where I ran out of space on my mouse pad. So yeah, it works quite nicely. And once again, the thing with the maximum zooming and the soft zooming comes in. We can try it again. This is without recoil control, and now with recoil control. And here you see another big advantage. If you don't zoom in maximum, you don't have to move your mouse that much, or your controller or whatever, because the optical area of movement is much smaller. So if you have space problems with your mouse on your table, on your mouse pad, then this is exactly the best way to zoom. Now let's try out the literally same weapon in full auto mode. This gives us the advantage of, since we already know what the recoil pattern is, to see how much differently full auto affects your recoil. Oh, as expected, the weapon goes out faster because you're shooting more bullets, and every single bullet is moving your weapon according to recoil. So if you're shooting a fast firing weapon, you will move faster. This means if you want to control recoil, you need to move also faster in the opposite direction. So let's try it out. Yeah, you see, it's hard because I just pulled it in the right direction, but the recoil isn't always the same because there are some random effects. These random effects are quite minimal because they were reduced and balanced out a couple months ago and also with the newest update. But still, you see that just simply pulling in the other direction won't let you perfectly stay in the center. Your weapon still will shake around. So let's try it again. Alright, this was better. I also concentrated more. And you see, there's still some shaking, but you still stay mostly in the center. Now let's try the same thing by using less zoom. First without recoil control. Alright. And now with recoil control. Yeah. With a weapon as little recoil as FG42. Yeah, both are quite manageable. It's not that hard to do. But you see, it works out fine. And here's the thing, the main advantage regarding recoil of Enlisted compared to games like Counter-Strike. In Counter-Strike, it's highly unrealistic because every weapon there gets its own unique recoil pattern. And the recoil pattern might look something like this. And this is not an exaggeration, they make stupid zigzagging and then stupid curves, stuff like that. Simply just to make the game more complicated, artificially. This nonsense isn't in the game of Enlisted, because Enlisted is a, well, better game. But there's still some uniqueness to many weapons. And here's the big takeaway, you don't need to learn any recoil patterns. I also never really did it. But I still can control basically every weapon. How do I do that? Very simple. Just by feeling. Because if you grab any random weapon, let's grab a machine gun. I don't know the recoil pattern of this weapon. Let's try to control it. Alright, the trick is if you shoot your weapon and you see your weapon swaying, you just always control back to the center. So when I spray and I see it goes up, I go down. It goes left, I go right, and so on. So you always try to stay in the center. Now, obviously, if you're playing many different nations with different BRs and different weapons, this is the safe and the time-saving way to play the game. If you want to become really good at certain weapons, then I actually recommend to just go into the practice mode and actually do the recoil test. Alright, this is almost a straight line. Yeah, it's slightly to the right, but almost straight. So if I want to control this recoil, I will go basically in a straight line down with a little bit to the left. Alright, didn't look that bad. Yep, this dude is mostly dead. So, yeah, very manageable. Now you know almost everything you need to know about controlling recoil and Enlisted. It's literally that easy, but there are some tricks that make it even easier for you. You can put all weapons in Enlisted in basically 3 different recoil classes. The first class would be a weapon with low enough recoil that you can ignore it. Weapons like this you just shoot and you aim a bit downwards and you will hit area of your shot. So this is the very easy type. Then there's the weapon with high vertical but low horizontal. In these cases already described, you just control downwards. And there's the weapon type of low vertical but high horizontal. Now this is the only problematic type because you cannot control horizontal because horizontal recoil, as you can see, it goes from left to right. There's still the vertical that pulls it up, but the horizontal will sway it left and right, and this makes it almost impossible to control unless you perfectly learn inside out when it goes left and when right. Now this isn't really worth the time, and there's one trick to mitigate this type of recoil. And here's what you do. You want to do a lateral or horizontal movement from one side to the other, because this will, at least optically override the horizontal recoil, and then all you do is you control downwards for the vertical, and you will hit all of your shots. So we imagine these are all groups of enemies, and we want to punish them, so let's go. So you see the vertical recoil was a bit of a problem, but the horizontal recoil wasn't. Let's try it again. And all of this done with the hard difficulty mode. We can do it in easy difficulty. Yep, that's quite easy. You see, even a weapon that has some really extreme horizontal recoil, this weapon, if you max it out, has something like 9 vertical and 19 horizontal. So more than twice as much horizontal. It's basically impossible to stay on one single point. Well, it is possible if you control it intensely, but if you go further away, it becomes... Yeah, you see, the weapon is constantly jumping around. So this trick of swaying horizontally will solve your recoil problems with weapons like this. So make sure you always try to spray a whole group, and then there's no problem. Now what do you do if you want to spray some bullets at enemies far away? Well, what you want to do in that case is just only burst. Something like 3-4 bullets. And you see in that case that only the 4th bullet starts jumping to the side. The first 3 bullets are quite precise. Yeah. So the first 3 bullets are mostly fine, but not the other one. Now the trick for that is you start aiming at the legs and let the weapon go upwards. Because then you make sure that your bullets actually perfectly land in the body. This would be dead, this would be dead, and so on. So spraying at long ranges, optimally starting at the legs, and then let the recoil go up the person, and then everything is fine. So now you know how to control the hardest case of high horizontal recoil weapons. And well, and the high vertical recoil weapons, well, as I already said, they're quite easy. You can also do the strafing, the lateral movement trick of just going like this, and everything's fine. And now comes the real pro trick that not many people know, and most sweatlord would rather not let you know this. So of course I'm gonna tell you. And here's how you actually do perfect aiming. Because as you can guess, controlling with the hand and the mouse is hard, especially with the controller. Now if you have a keyboard, you just use your A and D buttons, because this makes sure you move in a perfect straight line. Perfect straight line movement is usually only possible with cheating software, but well, you have 2 keys on your keyboard. Now let's see what happens if I use these 2. Oh my god! There's basically no recoil anymore. How did that happen? Very simple. If you constantly try to control recoil with your mouse, you're constantly, since you're not a machine, you have lots of imperfections in your movements, you're making the random pattern worse, because you are injecting your own randomness into it. But if you're moving in a straight line, none of this applies. You're creating much less chaos, and you get much more precision. And the best thing is you also make it harder for enemies to hit you, because yeah, guess what? If you're moving, yeah, the enemies will have problem hitting you, but it's easier for you to spray away groups of enemies. So this is the highest level of recoil control. Just move as little as possible with your mouse and move as much as possible with your keyboard. And control only downwards for the vertical, and then everything goes away. All the recoil goes away, you have the minimal recoil possible, and you have maximum precision. One of the greatest aspects of Enlisted is that you not only have your fighting and shooting part of the game, but also your army management part, giving it much more depth and much more fun. And regarding recoil, it means that you want to optimize your weapons and also your soldiers, your bodies of your soldiers and their skill and the perks. For the weapon, it's simple. You always want to maximize your weapon to 3 stars. So if you have something like this, upgrade it after you unlock the weapon upgrade reduction costs, of course, so you don't have to spend as much. And then give your weapon maximum stars, so you get the vertical and horizontal recoil reduction, and also the shots deviation reduction. Shots deviation reduction means you will have less dispersion, so less randomness, where your bullets are flying in the end. It doesn't affect your recoil, but it makes your weapon more precise. And obviously, getting a comfy minus 10% of both of your recoil types is highly welcome, because minus 10% is usually very, very hard to get, especially in the perks, because that's quite expensive. So this is the weapon aspect. Then, regarding your perks, I recommend to first give you some breath holding. This makes your soldier aim much more stable. Your shots will be much more precise. Recoil control will be easier. So this is worth it. You don't need to max this out, because if you're, for example, using bolt actions, you barely need it, or only 1 point, because you're resetting your breath holding after every shot. But if you have a weapon that you hold for a long time on your target, you want more of this. Especially with weapons of high capacity. 50 bullets with 800 cadence, yeah, you might want, you of course might want, absolutely want one of these. You don't need 3, maybe 1 or 2, but 1 of course, absolutely. And then, what about the recoil? Well, here we have a special case of, well, 1919. Everything under 30 vertical recoil is not much of a problem, unless the weapon is extremely high fire rate, but 800 is still okay. So even if I had the yellow points, I wouldn't put anything into vertical recoil, it's not worth it. But every horizontal recoil that's above 10, you really want to reduce, especially if it's above 15, because the horizontal, as I said, much more of a problem than the vertical. So if your setup is that you're using the Thompsons, or this particular Thompson, but there are also other Thompsons that are giving you headache with their horizontal. This, for example, you absolutely want to put into vertical, because you have low horizontal but high vertical. This Thompson, yeah, the horizontal is high, but the vertical also above 30, so I would reduce the vertical. And here, oh, this is an interesting case. Yeah, this is where you want to reduce horizontal and not the vertical, because the vertical is controllable, it's under 30, but the horizontal is almost 20. So yeah, these are some good examples. Also, this is why you have so many different Thompsons in the Tech tree, because you're basically picking your recoil pattern. That's what you do. You're not picking much else in the American types, except for what recoil you rather would get. So yeah, and yeah, for a weapon like this with 1919, you want to put your rare and precious yellow points, since you don't have infinite of them, into horizontal. This is extremely expensive, it costs 16, but it's much more worth it than putting them in horizontal. And then if you have some spare points, you of course would want to put them too, to reduce the vertical a little bit, but most of the time you won't have spare points, because you need to fill up the first 6, you need to fill up 6 points in this first row, and this is, yeah, where you need to start being economical, and I just decided for this layout. Also, if you want to move around while aiming, this perk is quite useful. Running means walking, because Dark Flow don't English, and that's why being faster while walking is quite useful, especially on longer engagement distances. It's giving you a nice advantage, making it harder for enemies to hit you. So absolutely useful. Now for the other case that's basically remaining, what do you do if you have let's say a more normal setup of recoil? For example, here we have the standard STG with, yeah, a typical example, high vertical, low horizontal. this is basically a perfect recoil pattern or recoil distribution, because here you absolutely can ignore the horizontal. You can put all your focus on the vertical, and then you do just the easy case of putting everything into minus vertical, so you get minus 40, and this you ignore. And the comfy advantage is that you have lots of additional points left for everything you want. Because the problem is, obviously, if you already have to spend 16 into one single ability, you don't have that much left anymore. Also keep in mind, the more yellow points you have, the less, the more additional recoil reduction you get for the vertical. And the calculation is every 2 yellow points your soldier has by nature give you minus 1%. So you basically divide this number by 2, and this is exactly your additional recoil, vertical recoil reduction. And since you have, in this case, a 20 yellow perk soldier, you will get minus 10. Together with this, you get minus 40, which means minus 50 overall. And this means we are halving this recoil, so our real recoil that we are having in game for this soldier with this weapon will be just 16.5 and 8. And this is how you make your weapons really controllable. You just upgrade them and you upgrade your soldiers, and everything's going to be fine. Now, the last special corner case that remains is, what do you do with semi-autos? It's already figured out. With bolt actions, this is my go-to bolt action for the Soviets. Not the best one, but I like the aimings. I like the aiming with it, so yeah, it works well. I can aim quickly with it. With bolt action, since they reset every single time, they show you some horrendously high recoil, but it literally doesn't matter, because after every shot, your recoil goes away. The only problem is if you're using semi-autos, because then you can shoot quickly, and then your recoil doesn't go away, it stays active if you shoot too fast. If you wait a little bit after every shot, you can also feel how the recoil goes away, but if you're shooting non-stop, the recoil doesn't go away, and then, yeah, then there's the problem of this high recoil. And for these types of cases, you might want to have some recoil control. As you can see here, this is my universal engineer. I have it perked for low BR, where he can shoot fire faster with bolt action, so I don't have any vertical recoil on him. If I go for the Japanese, for example, here I'm using a full auto weapon. But even if I would use a semi-auto, this would be the same exactly. I would just put everything into vertical, and then you can actually start clicking quickly and not suffer any problems with your firing, because your semi-auto rifle still isn't as fast shooting as a full auto weapon. So even if a semi-auto weapon shows you quite a high recoil, the effective recoil you will have in the game is still lower. So everything's fine. There's one funny special case regarding recoil in the game, and it's the last Japanese unlock, the Type 100 machine gun. These are 2 machine guns combined together. So you have 2 barrels, and every barrel is shooting every time you click. And you might see some comfily low vertical recoil number here. But the problem is, if you use the weapon in-game, I can show you quickly, it's horrendously hard to control. I posted a short video yesterday or 2 days ago on Reddit and on YouTube, and some random people complained that this weapon is unfair because it has no recoil. Well, guess what? This is how it shoots without recoil control. What the fuck is this? We are literally aiming at the sun after just 50 shots. All of the weapons I showed you, and I showed you even the hardcore problem, hard to control American weapons, this is almost impossible to control. Now, why is it so? Very simple, because every time you shoot, both barrels give you their recoil. So you have some extremely high recoil adding up in a very fast manner. Now, how do you manage this thing? Very simple. You need to, when you aim with an extreme weapon like this, start aiming with your mouse very, very far on top of your table, and then just start sliding your mouse constantly downwards. Alright, this wasn't as skillful. I'm gonna try out again. This time with more space on my table. And you see it becomes controllable. So yeah, shooting a weapon like this means you literally have to go maximum out of your way to do some aiming and mouse control shenanigans. And then even weapons like these who usually shoot this way start shooting this way. Basically in a straight line. Also, as you can see, I'm using the mouse, the keyboard here to have less horizontal recoil. And obviously the thing that sweatlords don't like, but this applies especially with weapons like this, how can you increase the speed at which you learn to control the recoil? Very simple. You want to play the same weapon obviously as often as possible. You do this by dual wielding, because together combined to all the other advantages of dual wielding, which are you don't have to reload during a gun fight, because you can just switch to the second weapon, which is basically instantly, as you can see, whereas reload would take forever. You have also more bullets, especially if you use two different weapons. And in our case here, you get much more practice, because let's say I'm shooting here the weapon, and if you wouldn't dual wield, you have to wait the longest time to reload, and usually this means you get killed. And if this was your last machine gunner, oh, there's no machine gun anymore for you to practice with. But if you can switch to your second weapon, you're basically doubling the amount of time per game that you spend practicing your weapon. And doubling isn't only twice as much in this case, since you have more intense practice with the same weapon, you're actually tripling or quadrupling your learning curve. So yeah, dual wielding is also extremely perfect to learn weapons faster. And the best thing, after the recent economy updates, upgrading and buying weapons became so cheap that having two of the same weapon, even if it's quite an expensive one, is no problem at all. So yeah, now is the best time to start dual wielding weapons, and your life's gonna be easier and your aim is gonna become great even faster. Okay, let me know what you think and whether you have some nice advice regarding recoil. And until soon, where I'm gonna show you some more stuff. Among other things, a guide for mortarmen, a guide for APCs, and some aiming and sniping. Well, we already have a sniper guide, but some aiming guide where I show you how to become lightning fast with your aiming and hit your enemies faster than they hit you. Until next time, goodbye.